Hello, Media Critique Chic followers. This is Borderline Latina, and I am taking over. And with all my episodes, I am here to talk about social justice issues from a critique freak perspective. On today's episode, I'm actually going to be sharing audio footage of a recent live that I did for Giving Tuesday, in which I talked about why we as Americans should give a blip about Haiti. So I am very happy to share my thoughts of this, the Latin America and US involvement in Haiti, and why it is important for us to focus on the complicated and often messed up history of US involvement in Latin American cultures, and how we should be engaging in restorative justice, charitable organizations, especially during this time of racial reckoning. So without further ado, here you go. Hi, everyone. So I wanted to try something a little bit new and different for myself for Giving Tuesday. And I also want to mention this is my very first live that I've done. Any type of social life, actually. So I'm really excited to do that. But what I want to do is kind of take a couple of moments here on Giving Tuesday to talk about my particular cause that I've been rooting for the past several years now. So for those of you who are not aware, I am, and my family is involved in a nonprofit in Haiti called the Jean-Joseph Darbouz Foundation, and it's been here for a little over 10 years now. It was founded in 2008. So in the spirit of giving, I know giving, we talk about Giving Tuesday, we talk about donations, and we talk about, things like that in financial nature, but I think it's also important today to give in terms of information. And so while people may be seeing things popping up on my socials about why am I doing this, I think it's important to talk about why to give a hoot. And I think that's important to talk about the history of Haiti, and particularly the US involvement in Haiti. It's a very deep, complex, and quite honestly effed up history. And it's trickled down since the beginning, since, enslavement and the Haitian independence in 1804 and down here today. I think it's very interesting how what people think about when they think about Haiti. I think they kind of think of the stereotypes of the poor children in Haiti, and it's filled with sadness and poverty and everything like that. And I think in particular with Americans, there's this sense of distance, right? Like, this is happening in another part of the world. We have so many things happening here, and yes, obviously we have so many things that are happening in the US. It's beyond ridiculous, right? But I think especially in this era of racial reckoning, I think it's important for us to at least acknowledge, our involvement as a nation in the past, and how that kind of trickles down today. I'm going to be very frank and honest, and I'm typically that person, give it to you straight. And so this thing may be uncomfortable for folks, but I think you can handle it. So let's dive into it. And if you're feeling uncomfortable, the therapist in me tells you to sit in this discomfort and move forward. And I'm not going to pretend to look at my notes as I'm talking about this. So Yes, Haiti, like many other countries, was occupied by slaves. Slave trade, African slaves were, captured in Africa and spread out throughout the world in different countries, and Haiti was one of them. What is very interesting in terms of facts about Haiti is that Haiti is the first country in the world, first slave nation in the world to gain its independence, period. It is also the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. There's no happy accident because of that. As a result of Haiti claiming its independence in January 1st, 1804, it has seen a downhill in terms of economic prosperity, and it's not any fault of the people's undoing, right? It's a very prosperous country. Actually, it's one of the most prosperous slave colonies because of the rich natural resources. Like, for example, sugarcane industry was major boom, and a lot of countries benefited from that. So it's not a necessity of like there was no goods to give or anything like that, right? It's because it took the world a very long time to acknowledge that Haiti was an independent country. So it claimed its independence from France, which was at that time the colonizer of Haiti, and before then was Spain. I think that's another thing too. People don't realize that Haiti is actually part of Latin America, and that it was initially occupied by Spain. Christopher Columbus, yes, actually Haiti is one of the countries that Christopher Columbus had traveled to and did some really messed up things. Murder, rape, killing, pillaging, taking of the resources, etc. I think it's really interesting we talk about Christopher Columbus. We celebrate the holiday in America, even though he didn't technically claim America, he didn't discover America. But he did discover Haiti in the fact of someone that just stumbled on and claimed something of their own, even though it was never their own and there were people there before them. But that's another story. So Haiti, so after its independence, people didn't want to acknowledge that was independent. This idea of a bunch of slaves banding together and being able to force out the colonizer and claim its independence was revolutionary. And because of that, people don't want to believe it. And France didn't want to believe it. And United States didn't want to believe it too. They didn't want to acknowledge the country's independence, and they hadn't done it for about 60 years. They actually did not. It was 1804. They did not acknowledge, U.S. did not acknowledge Haiti to be an independent nation until after our Civil War, which was in the 1860s, right? So in addition to that, France had required that in order for them to officially acknowledge them as a free country, which is just really messed up to begin with, got to pay for it. And they've been paying for it ever since, financially and, metaphorically and physically. So here we are. We're here with a nation that, even though they were able to claim their own, the rise against the colonizers and claim their own independence, they still weren't acknowledged as a free country. They had to pay tax for it. They weren't officially recognized by, folks outside of Europe, like America. And then afterwards, just because they weren't officially colonized or, by France, it doesn't mean that there wasn't still interest or occupation by France or even other European colonizers like Spain. And then we also have the U.S. Yay. The U.S. involvement in Haiti, U.S. occupation of Haiti. So one of the things that we really need to kind of understand, and it's hard to wrap around, but folks justify a lot of messed up things by not seeing people as people, right? If you look at the history of anti-blackness, of slavery, Black people and Black bodies have not been seen as like actual human beings, right? And that really messed up belief is the justification for the horrible bouts of violence, right? The justification of like, oh, we have the right to take their resources. We have the right to kind of control them. We have the right to kind of, teach them the better way because they're savage, because they're, they don't know better for themselves, right? This kind of maternal paternal feeling, right, which just justifies racism and murder and all these other messed up things, right? But that's the ideology, and it still trickles down today. If we see, like, very recently what's happening in the Texas border, which is not too far away from me, folks from Haiti seeking asylum, which is within their rights to do. They're crossing the border, and yet they're being stopped by police, being whipped, and being treated like they're not human. Say what you want about people seeking asylum, right? If you're going to stop someone from coming to the country, right, to the inhumane treatment that they're going through in order for people to be removed or pushed back to their home country, is really messed up. Once again, that justification of, if they're not really seen as people, if they're seen as less than, if they're seen as savages, is something that still permeates today. So back into that. So one of the other key things about the history, first of all, it's the Monroe Doctrine, which was in 1823. 1823, Monroe, which is the President Monroe, basically there was a broad declaration because there was a lot of European interest in a bunch of Latin American countries. And after the United States had claimed their own independence, right, they wanted to stake hold. This whole idea of manifest destiny, right, that we have the right to not only expand within our borders, right, to claim our own nation, but we have the right to kind of, seek and claim territories across the world. And the U.S. was not happy about how, there was still European interest in all the other countries, in many different countries of Latin America, including Haiti, right? We must include Haiti in Latin American culture and history because it is a Latin American country, Latin American culture. It has been treated as such, along with other countries, according to U.S. policies, European policies. And I think a lot of times people don't consider Haiti to be Latin American because of it's anti-blackness, that, there's a certain look to what it looks like to be Latinx, and darker skin isn't it, being black isn't it, but you can have both. So the Monroe Doctrine was basically U.S. response to being like, hey, Europe, don't be messing around in Latin America, rerun that show, we claim that stake. Very messed up. And you can see European countries being like, what? Okay. And it really doesn't matter how European cultures or countries responded, right? The whole idea that that U.S. was entitled to these different stakeholdings across Latin America and including Haiti, right? So we see military occupation. So one of the notable themes of occupation, which has happened across Haiti's history, has to do with a result of this justification, once again, that they're doing what's in best interest of Haiti, right? And so a lot of times you see U.S. being involved after like the overthrowing of a president or assassination of a president, right? Not trying to oversee or to not acknowledge or condone the fact that there have been violent presidencies in Haiti throughout its course of history. But I also want to say, just because the U.S. was being involved in, under this idea of like stopping it, right? Like, U.S. is going to be an ally to kind of help restore Haiti, in terms of economy and democracy after kicking out their leaders. In that case, it's like, oh, I'm your ally, I want to help you out. But it's not really the case, right? If the occupier themselves feels like they're entitled to some of those resources. So yeah, they might be coming under this, this guise of being like, we're going to help, Haiti restore, we're going to overthrow the president, we're going to do all these other things, but you're still using the resources and you're staying there much longer than you need it. So the occupation, which happened on the heels of the President Wilson's presidency administration, which was in the early 1900s. So I think it's 1914 and 1934. 1914 was during his presidency, right? Which is on the heels of the First World War. And if anyone knows anything about President Wilson, his arguments that all presidents, here, white presidents here, have a history of racism and racism attitudes and things like that. He was a big old racist, like a big old, Just like, in terms of modern racism, it's kind of one of those things where like races, you don't really see racists about racist things anymore, although that is not true. We definitely see more instances right now, but a lot of it can be more covert now. This back in the days, one of those presidents was like saying the most horrible things, right, out loud. And so having this idea of occupying Haiti because of the country, because they don't know any better, we're here to help them, but also we're able to stake our interest in that and kind of pull in these resources. So even though we're trying to, as a nation, the U.S. was trying to establish and rebuild the economy, right, by investing in trade and foreign trade and things like that, that actually hurt our economy more, or hurt the Haitian economy more than actually helped it. Once again, draining the resources, right? And who's benefit from those profits? The U.S., right? So once again, this kind of these double-edged swords of interest of like the U.S. is trying to help us to reestablish our independence because we don't know better for ourselves and we need help and we're savages and we're doing all these things, right? I'm over-exaggerating, but not really over-exaggerating, because if you line up the beliefs, that's exactly what's happening here, right? The justification for this, Why do we feel as a nation, the United States, that we need to go to other countries and kind of help stabilize them under this kind of paternalistic being like, we know what's best for you? Do you know what's best for you? If you're truly helping a country, you should be meeting folks where they're at. You should be able to assess what their needs are and what they view as like success for them. Right? But that's usually not what happens, right? When other people get involved, it's what they think what's best for them, right? Not what's actually best for like the country itself. Fast forward to natural disasters and things like that too, right? When it comes to foreign aid, yes, the U.S. has been trying, there's a lot of NGOs, organizations and things like that to help with aid and disaster relief. But then the issue again, right? What are the interests of these NGOs? Even though they may be helpful, right? Are they doing more harm than good because maybe they're aligning their interests with what they think is best as opposed to what's really helping the mess, right? Not to mention that if we have a lot of aid that is foreign aid, right, it's not really built within the country itself. So you have most of the help is happening from outside the country that's once removed, right? So let's get a double-edged sword. So let's fast forward to today, right? I think when most people think about Haiti, they probably think about the recent things like, the recent earthquake that happened summer 2021. And then, the previous, I mean, there have been several hurricanes and earthquakes and things like that, but this has been probably the most significant one within the past 10 years. 2010, right, was the other recent major significant earthquake, right? So there's a damage, right, to this right now. So what I'm trying to say is that it's important for us to acknowledge as a nation, as an American nation, that the history of our double-edged sword, and I don't even know if that's the word I'm going to use, but I'm going to use it now because I got to wrap things up. Effed up interest, right? If we kind of go in this guise that we're really helping people, do we really want to help people? And I'm hoping that with, raising awareness about these things and raising awareness of local organizations like my nonprofit organization. Obviously, I have a bias because I am Haitian. My family's from Haiti. It's really personal to me. But once again, if I wasn't Haitian, would I even know about what's happening in Haiti? That's actually really scary to know, right? So I just want to educate folks, because if you don't have that tie, I can understand why you don't know that much about it and know that much about the U.S. involvement in it. So if we are talking about truly helping people and truly looking at people, as opposed to kind of falling into these stereotypes and truly believing these stereotypes of Haiti being a S-hole country, I'm censoring myself tonight in case people want to reshare these videos on platforms where I can't do the rated R version. But, a certain quote unquote president back in 2018 called us S-hole countries. And that's what it is. It's this idea of let's remove ourselves and call this country that we look down upon and not acknowledging our factor as a nation, right? Our role in our nation and in the destruction of this country's resources. It's really messed up. I don't want to sound like trauma porn. I like that term because, a lot of times people, they kind of get inundated with these messages of being like all these terrible things that happen in Haiti. And I don't want to focus on the terrible, or only on the terrible things. I think Haiti is a very resilient, prosperous nation. We just need to be aware of the role of foreign interests, that's putting it very lightly, in the destruction of its resources, right, in the economic decline. In that we should be able to invest in local businesses and organizations. Not to say that we can't invest in, international or national organizations helping Haiti. Absolutely, right? But let's hold accountable their interests, like how they're really helping and doing their research and things like that. So my family, obviously, is local from the ground up, right? Like obviously the majority of us, or I should say the stakeholders and the founders, currently live in the U.S., but we have grown up in Haiti. We have connections and workers in Haiti. We have a school. So we have a bunch of different programs. I'm going to highlight two, just for the purposes of today, kind of wrapping up things too. Just realized that I have a class at 7, but I don't think, my students will be okay with a professor being a couple minutes late due to a worthy cause. But anyway, so the Jean-Joseph Darboux Foundation, I can't even say philanthropy, organization in 2008, and there are many different pillars of this. Is building families, building communities, right? Is our slogan. I want to talk about education and disaster relief. So education, we have a school. We have a school, elementary school. We're trying to work to expand and build that, to involve more grades over time, right? But we have several grades now at the moment, and we're really investing in the education of Haiti. And, for people like from the United States, like there's this kind of guarantee of like, you have to be in school through the age of 16, right? And it's not necessarily the case in Haiti. Right. So there's no kind of like legal standing of like a person being in school for that long of time, especially. So we want to invest in the resources of educating people, making sure they're getting a good quality education. So we have students, we have I think a couple hundred students now, or a little over 100, I think 150 to 200. Hopefully people can fact check me on that, but at least 100 students. And, we have teachers on the ground. And so, the money that we're raising can help support them, the teachers' salaries, support and fund the school. We also have like a medical, resources, and a clinic. Usually around the summer, we have like these annual trips that we go in there and we kind of do these services where we can kind of give supplies and help for people in the community. We also provide disaster relief. So, when the thing happened over the summer, but even before then, every time there was a major disaster, we're the ones that are receiving, and trying to get funds to kind of help people on the ground. And we have connections with folks on the ground, right? So like, that if you're giving money to us, that we have that connection to folks on the ground, for that. So I just want to hold people accountable too, right? Like do research on me, do research on our organization to make sure that, to double check that we are legit. I mean, we are legit, but I encourage people, if they're like, oh, I want to vet my resources, go ahead. The link to my stuff is in my bio. Links to the material that was used in the making of this episode is included in the description. So there you have it. Thank you all for listening to my retelling of the history of U.S. involvement in Haiti, and hopefully I was able to guide you through a decolonization and unlearning of what you may or may not have known or learned about Haiti growing up. A lot of times Haiti is excluded from the history textbooks in America in general. And unfortunately, the stuff that people learn is incomplete and inaccurate. So I encourage you all to look at the links in the description to get more information about the topic of discussion for tonight. And as always, this is Borderline Latina, and I am signing off. Until next time.